My name is Amanda, and I'm a 30-year-old woman. Recently, after nearly 3 years of silence, I received a call from my mother. She called seeking my help because my sister and her husband were facing a severe crisis. To provide some context, the man my sister is now married to was once destined to be my husband. My sister, Susan, who is 25, and my fiancé, Robert, who is also 30, betrayed me on the day of our engagement. Robert and I had been a couple since college, and after nearly 3 years together, he proposed, even organizing a surprise party for that evening. I felt on top of the world until around 2 p.m. that day when I stepped outside for better phone reception and witnessed Susan and Robert passionately kissing. It took them a few moments to notice me standing there, utterly shocked. I couldn't fathom he would betray me, especially on our engagement night. When they finally saw me, they separated quickly, but the damage was done. I fled to my car and drove straight to the nearest hotel, overwhelmed and trying to deny the reality of what I had just witnessed. While in my hotel room, I received a remorseful text from Susan confessing her love for Robert. This affair, it turned out, had been going on for some time. Shortly after, Robert sent a similar message, explaining he had proposed to me in hopes of suppressing his feelings for Susan, a plan that obviously failed. He admitted it was never about me but about them, believing they were truly meant to be. I was merely a placeholder, allowing him to ultimately connect with Susan. Devastated, I stayed at the hotel for several days to collect myself, lost in the shock and betrayal, almost convincing myself it was just a cruel joke. After nearly a week, I returned home, needing to gather my belongings and return to work to avoid losing my job. Upon arriving, I discovered my entire family had been living with Robert, all under one roof, awaiting my return. This might have been heartwarming if not for the circumstances of my departure. Despite their non-stop attempts to contact me while I was gone, I had not responded to any of their messages. So, when I finally returned, the house was in complete disarray. Everyone rushed to embrace me, expressing their joy at my return. Even Susan approached me, tears in her eyes, and wrapped me in a tight hug. I was too stunned to react and simply stood there silently as they all crowded around me. Once the commotion subsided, I cleared my throat and announced that I had come only to collect my belongings and leave permanently. Until then, Robert had been silent, but upon hearing my declaration, he revealed that he had already packed his belongings and was moving in with Susan, now that everything was out in the open. My family, my parents, my aunt, and my father's youngest sister who has lived with us since her husband died, all wore broad smiles, which I found completely inappropriate. Susan, standing beside Robert, looked at me sadly yet still smiling. Overwhelmed, I confronted them, asking why they were smiling, as I saw no reason for joy. Susan had ruined my engagement and taken the man I loved for nearly 3 years. There was nothing humorous or endearing about that. My mother spoke up, stating they couldn't alter the past but could embrace the future, a future that included Susan and Robert together. Although their relationship began with deceit, they regretted the circumstances but hoped I could see that this was supposedly for the best. Susan apologized for her actions, claiming she couldn't control her feelings and regretted not being honest sooner. She insisted that their love was genuine and that they planned to spend their lives together. Then, they kissed in front of me, causing my mother to tearfully wipe her eyes. I lost my composure and snapped, telling them that their actions were not sentimental but utterly repulsive. Surprisingly, my family became irritated with me, accusing me of being petty rather than happy for Susan. They claimed I was selfish and disapproved of my reaction. I was taken aback by their attitude and demanded they leave my house. I couldn't fathom how they were defending Susan and Robert, making me out to be the antagonist, as if I was overreacting. My father intervened, urging me not to behave childishly and to accept the situation, claiming that such things happen and that I should be pleased that my sister had found her soulmate rather than feel jealous. Their reactions seemed irrational to me, and I couldn't handle it anymore. So, I decided enough was enough, went to my room, quickly packed some of my belongings, and left without engaging further or heeding their pleas for me to stay. It became evident that they prioritized Susan's happiness over mine, disregarding what was morally right or wrong and my own feelings. Following that day, my family attempted to reach out multiple times, but I never responded, feeling no obligation to them. A few weeks later, I even received an invitation to Susan and Robert's wedding, which I promptly declined. Many mutual friends and some relatives who were aware of the truth also supported my decision by declining the invitation and distancing themselves from my family. It's been 3 years, and I've completely severed ties with them. They occasionally try to reconnect, sending well wishes on my birthday or during the new year, but I consistently ignore these overtures. Although I never blocked them, allowing them to see how well I was doing through my public social media account to perhaps evoke a sense of jealousy, it was a minor retaliation but the least I could do after their treatment of me. Until a few days ago, I had been largely unaware of their recent activities when my mother reached out from an unfamiliar number. When I answered the call, I didn't recognize the voice initially, but soon realized it was my mother. I attempted to hang up, but her desperate plea for a conversation stopped me. She sounded deeply troubled, compelling me to listen, if only for a few minutes. She explained that Susan and Robert had started a business years ago which was now floundering. Their investors were pulling out as the business failed to turn a profit, and they had sunk further into debt, even attracting the attention of loan sharks. They were under pressure from everyone, from their employees to their creditors. I was living comfortably and could technically afford to help, so, in desperation, my mother turned to me as a last resort, asking for a loan of nearly $95,000 to help Susan and Robert. I questioned why Susan wasn't the one asking for help directly and learned that Susan and Robert had specifically asked my mother not to tell me, still mindful of the rift from 3 years ago. Susan wasn't ready to seek assistance from me directly, but my mother knew of no one else capable of providing such substantial financial help quickly. The situation was dire. Susan and Robert were even struggling to afford basic necessities. While both our families and Robert's were trying to support them, it wasn't enough, especially considering many were retired and had their futures to consider. Despite this, I was reluctant to help. They had forfeited the right to ask anything of me the day they betrayed me. I informed my mother that I couldn't assist them, and even if I could, I chose not to. She became upset, accusing me of cruelty and urging me to consider my family. I reminded her that Susan and Robert hadn't considered me when they engaged in their affair, and my family hadn't thought of me when they chose to support them. So, I didn't see why I should be concerned about their well-being now. I've worked hard to reach where I am today, and I wasn't about to hand over $95,000 to 2 people who had shown they didn't deserve my support. My mother burst into tears on the phone, accusing me of growing up to be selfish and warning that my sister and her husband would face severe consequences if I didn't help. Despite her pleas, I firmly stated that I couldn't assist them and ended the call. Since then, she has bombarded me with texts, pleading with me to rethink my decision and consider my sister. She insists this isn't the time for petty revenge, claiming Susan is in dire straits and suggesting I'd regret not helping. My mother's desperation is palpable, but I refuse to feel guilty. I don't think I'm wrong for not financially aiding my sister after she betrayed me 3 years ago. I've finally blocked my family, a step I hadn't taken before because I wanted them to see how well I was doing and perhaps feel a twinge of jealousy. Moreover, I hesitated to cut ties completely in case I regretted it should something tragic occur. But now, I've let go of those concerns. Keeping them in my life this long was the actual petty action. Refusing to help now is merely logical. They've already squandered so much, and I'm certain they wouldn't be able to repay the money. $95,000 is a significant sum, and although I'm financially stable, it doesn't mean I can afford to give away such an amount without expecting repayment. If it were a close friend, the expectation would be the same. Even if I were inclined to help, I would still expect repayment, but considering these are people who were once close to me yet are no longer considered my loved ones, I cannot trust them to fulfill that obligation. Thus, there is no compelling reason for me to assist them. It's as straightforward as that. I've discussed this with several friends who concurred that my decision to withhold the funds was justified, not out of vengeance but because it is unreasonable and imprudent to support those who have previously betrayed me. Consequently, I have now blocked my mother to prevent any further attempts to guilt-trip me, which has eased my worries. At least, that was my initial thought. Update 2. Hi everyone, something significant unfolded today. While at work, I received an urgent call from my neighbor, informing me that a couple was outside my house, loudly demanding to see me. They had been creating a disturbance for nearly an hour, refusing to leave. Although my neighbor described them, I had a strong hunch about their identities, and her description only confirmed my suspicions. It was Susan and Robert. Given their erratic behavior, my neighbor urged me to return and handle the situation, convinced they were up to no good. Recognizing the potential threat, I thanked her and hurried home, anxious about them breaking in. Arriving in just under 20 minutes, I caught them attempting to pick the lock. As I confronted them, demanding to know their intentions, Robert swiftly knocked my phone from my hand. Susan claimed they merely wanted to talk, assuring they needed nothing from me at that moment. I sternly told them that any discussion would be brief and strictly outside in the yard. I was not about to invite them in. They reluctantly agreed, which was a relief. Because I thought it unwise to let them inside due to their apparent hostility, I kept the conversation outside. Susan began by telling me that our mother had updated her about the phone call, how I had ignored subsequent texts, and even blocked their numbers. She accused me of being unfair, claiming that after 3 years, I should have moved past the incident. She criticized me for being dramatic and seeking attention from the family, stating she felt insulted by my refusal to help, which prompted her visit. Susan explained that she had temporarily resolved their financial issues by selling their house and all their jewelry, but anticipated needing more help in the future. She wanted assurance that she could count on me for future support. I unequivocally told her that she should not expect anything from me under any circumstances, expressing deep resentment towards her and her husband. My anger was so intense that I warned her it was taking all my restraint not to lash out physically, and it would be best if they left immediately. Shockingly, Robert then demanded I sign a document promising financial support whenever they needed it in the future. I dismissed the idea, knowing such a document wouldn't hold up legally if signed under duress. The situation escalated when Susan pushed me, claiming I owed them help because we were family. Stunned by her audacity and tempted to retaliate, I resisted, knowing it would only exacerbate the situation. Instead, I quickly retrieved my phone, which Robert had knocked to the ground, and made a dash for my car. Fortunately, I had left the engine running, allowing me to quickly drive away without looking back. From a safe distance, I called the police to report the incident. I returned home just before they arrived, about 25 minutes later, and briefed them on everything that had transpired. The police then arrested Susan and Robert, taking them into custody. I was aware that the charges weren't severe and that Susan and Robert would likely be released soon, but having them taken into custody was still a relief. It meant I didn't have to deal with them directly for the time being. Several hours have passed since their arrest, and surprisingly, I haven't heard from any other family members. I had expected someone to reach out, perhaps from a different number, but none have. I suspect they're either ready to move on or simply biding their time, waiting for the right moment to contact me once things have settled down. Update 3 *. Hi everyone, it's been about a week since my last update. I thought the arrest of Susan and Robert might finally lead my family to leave me alone, but I was mistaken. Yesterday, my parents came to my house, significantly humbler than Susan and Robert had been. They requested a moment to talk, so I let them in. As soon as she entered, my mother began to cry and immediately apologized for siding with Susan over me. My father explained that seeing Susan and Robert's aggressive behavior towards me, which led to their arrest, had changed their perspective. They could no longer view them in the same light and had decided to sever ties with them. Throughout their visit, my mother was tearful, and my father continually apologized for previously siding against me. I told my parents that while I recognized their change of heart, it was too late to mend our relationship. I've grown accustomed to living independently, on my own terms, and I'm not interested in prioritizing family dynamics that have repeatedly hurt me. While I acknowledged their apology, I couldn't commit to rebuilding our relationship. It felt like trying to salvage something irreparably broken. They seemed disappointed when I expressed my desire to remain distant but eventually requested that I at least unblock them to maintain some form of contact. I complied, unblocking them, which felt somewhat odd but manageable for now. I'm uncertain about what the future holds, but I am committed to maintaining my peace and living life as I see fit. Thanks for tuning into this update, and please subscribe to my channel for more insights and updates.